Are you ready for this? An open access, integrated network neutral co-location and dark fiber superstructure provided across the United States, all in one national plan connecting subsea landing points, wireless towers, data centers, carrier hotels, co-location facilities, enterprise buildings, schools, and government with next generation, long haul, and short haul dark fiber. You say, what? Well, think of it this way. Did you ever wonder just how the global broadband economy for the United States, the one that will demand ever-increasing bandwidth for mobile networks, video content, distributed cloud computing and storage, as well as other advanced technologies, will become a reality? Well, you're about to find out. Greetings, everyone, and welcome from the Technology Association of Georgia. It's December 3rd, 2015, and this is Tech Talk. I'm your host, Frank Baia. Up to the Tech Talk, he's the founder and CEO of Allied Fiber, the nation's first integrated network-neutral co-location and dark fiber infrastructure. Still don't get it? You will. It's the connection to everything. Meet Hunter Newby, an entrepreneur with a successful track record at transforming theory and thought leadership into the infrastructure behind every broadband innovation. Prior to Allied Fiber, he was the founder and chief strategy officer and a director of Telex Group Incorporated, one of the leading carrier hotel interconnection facility operators in the United States. He's a recognized authority in the industry, served on several advisory boards, published author and public speaker, and a recipient of numerous awards, including being named to the Global Telecom Business Top 40 Under 40 in 2010. It's a tech talk focused on building and providing access to an abundant supply of dark fiber in the areas where it's most needed. And how will America meet the need for more broadband access, wireless backhaul data center distribution, and lower latency communication services? Find out now as we share the vision and explore the future of Allied Fiber with its founder and CEO, Hunter Newby. This edition of Tech Talk is brought to you by GlobalSpeak.com, new media consultants, corporate video and audio communications, video and audio production and distribution, live and virtual event production. Tag TV and Tag Radio is a service of GlobalSpeak.com, creatively delivering powerful marketing, video, and audio solutions. Hunter, welcome to Tech Talk.
Hi. Hello, Frank. Thank you for having me.
Excited to learn a lot about the telco industry that I think a lot of our listeners really don't know. I know you've got a vast experience and in all humility considered an industry expert without a doubt. One of the things I wanted to touch upon is this concept of network-neutral interconnection business that you treat communications infrastructure as a real estate. So let's talk a little bit about your background, but maybe cover a little bit about how that evolves and what that's all about for our listeners that may not be aware of it.
Certainly. Well, my background in the telecom space, I started in the mid-'90s with a company called LVDS WorldCom, which if you've been around telecom long enough, you probably know of them, of that company. It's a pretty well-known company, WorldCom. And I always like to say that that's where I learned how not to do practically everything. The opposite of what WorldCom was doing, particularly the provisioning side. And that wasn't necessarily their fault, but it was just the plague of years projected forward. If you did the opposite, you'd be successful. So out of that was born Telex, which was my prior company that I was a part of.
Right.
And we started in New York at 60 Hudson Street, originally as a carrier ourselves, a 214 international wholesale voice arbitrage business, but then eventually got into the business of solving physical layer interconnection problems within 60 Hudson Street because it was central to our own ability to deliver service to our customers. And the problem of provisioning circuits was not unique to Telex at the time. It was impacting all network operators. So I sort of discovered that this was a global problem at a local level, and then thought through how to come up with and devise a manner in which interconnection problems could be resolved more efficiently and cost effectively, which led to the physical layer interconnection business model of Telex that we started there at 60 Hudson Street way back when, around about year 2000. Through that, we acquired 56 Marietta Street in Atlanta, Georgia. So I'd done some homework of my own to study the long-haul fiber routes in the United States and look for the other 60 Hudson Streets, as it were, through the U.S., and discovered there's only a handful of buildings in the U.S., North America, that really matter. And 56 Marietta was one, so that led me to Atlanta and acquiring 56 Marietta Street back in May 2004, developing the telex business model there, and then, perfecting the art, let's call it, of physical air interconnection through a business model within real estate. So a real estate model applied to networks for interconnection. That was novel at the time, and now it's very well known and taken for granted, quite frankly. So the Allied Fiber business model was an outgrowth of that. So just imagine connecting the two concepts, long-haul dark fiber and neutral real estate for interconnection that links the major carrier hotels, and really the genesis of it was to link the submarine cable landing regions in the U.S., which is the primary point of access and egress for all the continents, and then, thoroughfare through the U.S.
Well, that's pretty overwhelming to understand. I often joke about the fact that because we cover so many verticals in technology, we don't just cover one particular industry, telco, say, for example, or health IT or fintech, that I come to a lot of these situations as a tourist, and I think our listening audience is eclectic enough to understand that we don't know almost what we don't know. And so when you talk about some of the things that you're describing, I'm, in my mind, trying to simplify it. Is it a matter of integration and capacity? Is that the basics? I mean, I'm oversimplifying it, but by combining these two infrastructures together, it allows for, when you talk about real estate, I'm assuming that relates to capacity. Is that correct?
Real estate really relates to proximity, first and foremost. And proximity and creating physical proximity is where the benefits.
So when you say real estate, you mean real estate. Physical proximity is a competitive advantage in your particular.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, well, you say, oh, yeah. Again, understand, one of the great parts is that I get to come here as pretty much ignorant, because I think a lot of our listeners, there are some that I'm sure are equal to your background and experience, but a lot of them haven't heard the terminology or really get an insight the way that you're describing it. So
yeah, I'll give you an analogy.
Yeah,
sure,
right.
No problem. I'll give you an analogy. It's like an airport. You go to Hartsfield. Why do you go to Hartsfield? Because that's where the planes are, and that's the biggest airport in the country. So what do you have there? You have choice. You have choice of routes, and you have choice of providers. So where do you get the greatest economic benefit when you want to travel on a plane? By going to Hartsfield. Now, there's probably other local airports around Atlanta. I think there's one called Charlie Brown, actually, which is like a little regional airport. Okay. Compare Charlie Brown to Hartsfield in terms of scope and scale and number of planes and routes and price. You'll probably understand that there's a pretty big delta, no pun intended, to the airline, there in Atlanta between the two airports. So now imagine you live in an area where there's no airport at all. Flying is not an option. So now think about what it costs to get to that place, and then what it costs to do everything in that place that doesn't have an airport, in terms of, just access, in terms of what cargo, in terms of whatever, access to food, distribution of goods, etc. Everything's more expensive in a place that doesn't have access. And that is the exact same analogy to network infrastructure. Everything is more expensive in rural America because there's no access. There's no open access. There's no choice. There's no competition. That means that there's fewer number of providers, if not just one, maybe two.
Sure.
The prices are high and the service is low.
Well, and the bottom line, it impacts employment, it impacts job opportunities, economic investment, economic exposure, especially in this day and age. So, yeah, I get that part of it. So, again, now we're evolving out of your experience with WorldCom and Telex, and now we're going to evolve into your entrepreneurial startup, Allied Fiber. And one of the things that I know that in reading some of the background material, you talk about the first integrated network-neutral co-location and dark fiber infrastructure provider. For our listeners, go into a little bit. I think I get an idea of integrated and network-neutral, but describe some of that, but also go into the dark fiber.
Sure. So I'll give you another analogy. Think of it like the interstate highway system or I-95. So it's a highway, that's the fiber part, and then there's rest stops along the way with gas stations and food, and you have choice, essentially.
Right.
But it's all about real estate. It's premised on land and then structures on land, whether they be roads or buildings. So Allied Fiber is the same thing. It integrates the fiber on a long-haul basis, which is the roads, and then access points, which we have through what's called a handhole, and that's a splice point along the route, which would kind of be like an on-ramp and an off-ramp to the highway. And then about every 60 miles, we have our own buildings that we have built. They're precast concrete and steel. They're modular buildings, and they're placed on land that's adjacent to the railroad right-of-way where our ducts are, where the fiber cable is in. And those buildings, the purpose of the buildings is for amplification of light, which is essentially like pouring electrons into the photons to boost the light signal and make it go further.
Gotcha.
And that's a technical thing, I understand, but that's kind of the equivalent of a gas station. Your car will go just so far, and you need to gas up and then keep going. Same concept, and that's what we do. We tie together the dirt right-of-way with duct and fiber, and then dirt, land adjacent to those ducts and that fiber for our buildings, and then we create a finished product, which are fiber pairs and space and power for our customers' equipment, for them to put their equipment into our buildings to connect to the fiber pairs that we've essentially rented them.
Okay, so now I'm thinking you've got to have it everywhere. Otherwise, there's a lot of places that you'd want to connect to that you could provide, for example, the base of operation, the gas station, if you to relate back to the point you were making. But it has to go to another gas station. And so do you have connectivity throughout the entire United States or out the world, or is it a regionally controlled by the real estate that you currently own?
It's controlled by the real estate, or I should say at this moment in time, the access to the Allied Fiber system is limited to where it's been deployed, which at this time is between Miami and Atlanta on railroad right-of-way. Florida, it's on the Florida East Coast Railroad, and then in Georgia, just north of Jacksonville and into Georgia, it's on Norfolk Southern Railroad. So our model is played out on our website, where you can see it extrapolated to take you to the New York and then through Chicago out to Seattle and then down to L.A. and back. And the New York and then Florida between Miami, let's call it Boca and Jacksonville, and then out west around Seattle and L.A., those are the bookends that connect the submarine cable landing regions. So our system is a replicable, scalable, and predictable model that follows the railroad right-of-way all the way around that ring and provides for access every 3,000 to 5,000 feet, depending on the right-of-way we're on, through the handholds, which I described before, and then our buildings about every 60 miles for the tunable lasers so that they can place our customers can place their amplification equipment. But then our buildings are open to everyone. It's an open access environment where all local network operators, fixed line and mobile, can bring their fiber into our buildings, and they can meet the long-haul providers as well as the content providers. And Frank, the most important component of this, I think, for people that are maybe not so technical, to have a better understanding of what we're doing with real estate, is to think about their smartphone and think about what they try to do with their smartphone or what their kids try to do with their smartphones while they're driving down the street. They're all trying to stream Netflix. Everybody wants video on their phone, and they want it to work without any delay. No jitter, no buffering, no latency. And there's really two ways to solve for that. One of them is better math through algorithms, which is sort of software, if you will, generally defined as. And then the other is physical proximity. And that proximity would mean to take the content and to store it, which is a term referred to as caching, at the edge. And the edge is basically wherever you are with your mobile device. So you want that content as close to the edge as possible to cut down on the distance that the session needs to take place over, meaning from your mobile device back to the servers where the video content is stored. So the closer you can bring the video content to the mobile device at any given point, the faster the rendering is going to take place. So everyone knows what that experience is like when you have your mobile phone and your smartphone and you click on a link on YouTube or whatever, and you see the little wheel spinning around and you can't watch the video. Okay, that's because of latency.
Sure.
And that has a lot to do with distance, and the distance is solved through proximity, closer proximity. So Allied Fiber's system enables the physical infrastructure and creates the neutral home for the mobile networks and the fixed line networks to meet the content networks in the middle, not just in the big cities, but every 60 miles along the route through the entire country, which will help the entire thoroughfare of bits happen more freely and more cost effectively.
Well, you know, there's an old Eastern philosophy says that the solution is simple; it's the implementation that is really challenging. And as you're describing it, I'm thinking, oh, of course, oh, I get it. And truly, I do understand. Now I'm thinking something as simple as right of way to rail. Don't they see it as an asset? And it's not just negotiating real estate. I guess you have to get into the business of acquiring access to those tracts to be able to.
That is correct. Yeah. So the Eastern philosophy is very elegant and very true. Ideas are really great, but nothing without execution. Mm-hmm. And the execution is where the rubber meets the road. So negotiating railroad right-of-way agreements is paramount for us because we prefer railroad right-of-way for our core route. And, yeah, it takes a while to negotiate those, and that costs real money. So, you know, all of our fiber cable is buried. It's all underground. And that's important for our customers. Our customers want that in their products because it's more reliable to them, and it's more secure within the railroad right-of-way versus public right-of-way in some cases, and certainly aerial cable, whether that's on poles or utility or what have you. And that's, again, not just a preference, but in many cases a technical specification requirement from our customers to us, and that does require us to then negotiate for those rights of way. So we choose paths, unique routes based on a variety of factors. Diversity is one. It's a big one. Sheer access, though, is a threshold issue, I'd say. Where there's duct that exists, we prefer that over right-of-way where there isn't duct because obviously it's going to take longer and cost more money to put duct into right-of-way where it doesn't exist. But in some cases you have to. And other factors, population density, points of interest along the route. Some cases it's power, so where there's high density of power and it's, you know, very cheap. There's data center development opportunities, city centers, population centers for the mobile network operators, proximity to highways where there's a lot of cars, which I was explaining, where people are trying to stream Netflix. Hopefully not while they're driving, but their kids certainly.
Well, the Internet of Things. I mean, it'll get a whole lot more serious than watching video at some point. It'll be how you communicate, transact, drive your car, operate your home, operate your business, for that matter. It'll all be through some form of mobile device that we're currently calling an iPhone or a phone.
You're absolutely right, Frank.
The layers and tentacles that you must address in order to build out your infrastructure, because the other side of it's got to be there's a governmental aspect to it, right? Both pro and con. I mean, they've got their rights and controls, and yet the other side of it is the economic development aspect. I mean, I can imagine that in some cases you're not only a welcome but incentivized to come into a particular area because of its economic potential. Absolutely.
We have struck such a positive chord with the economic development agencies and officials, mayors, leaders of town councils, all up and down, you know, from Miami all up the whole Florida coast and then through Georgia. Yeah, it resonates with them. We've got a lot of positive feedback. We've got quotes from them in public announcements that we've made, from the mayor of West Palm Beach to, you know, the city managers and the IT leaders for the city of Palm Coast and Florida and others through Georgia. And we've just announced a couple of deals with some regional operators in middle Georgia, where we've already had a significant positive effect on their business, on their bottom line, on the economies of the local towns and municipalities that they serve. This is all very well known and understood to them because they have been cut off from this forever. Since their inception, they are islands, and they acutely understand the issue, whereas a lot of people that are within the major cities do not understand this problem because they have the benefit of and take for granted the fact that they live in a major city, and they kind of don't see the forest for the trees. But people that are in the rural parts, the parts that we have designed our system to incorporate along the way, not to exclude, but to provide access to them as and when they're ready. And many of them are ready now, which is, of course, you know, great. That's our business model, to facilitate access. You know, so that's been well received by all. economic development wise.
Well, the other, and I'm going to, unfortunately, the really good conversations can go too long, too fast, but I'm curious in terms of, when you start talking about taking it for granted in the inner city, you've got the other side. Steve Jobs' comment about people don't know what they want until they see it. It all boils down to government is driven by local politics, and politics is about votes, and it usually has budgets and money that are required. So I can imagine the layers and tentacles of getting approval for some of the expenditures that are necessary or some of the infrastructure that you need to partner with has got to be an interesting dynamic. Let's not drift into that because I may be wrong or right, but I can imagine that's got to be pretty complex.
No, you're right, but briefly, the way that I deal with that is just to provide the system. The platform is there, and it's ready for them when they're ready. We're here when they're ready. I understand it takes time, and the system, when it's put into place on the backs of the global subsea cable system operators and the large incumbent telephone companies in the U.S. and the content providers and others, allow for us to create a system that leaves the handhold and the colos in place there in those towns and those counties. When those local network operators can get through their local politics and figure out their budgets, they can connect. And every day that they don't do it, they're losing out, and they know it. So they're motivated to fix the problem because we're there and we're ready for them. Interestingly, other counties and other states that we haven't got to yet have seen what we've already done and figured it out, and now they're trying to pull us towards them.
Sure,
so
I can appreciate, again, like we were talking about, I mean, something as basic as the evolution of health IT and the idea of telemedicine in a rural marketplace where hospitals are closing down. I mean, I'm seeing that the idea of some of the rural markets and some of the areas in terms of the access and the capacity is without question. It's not a matter of wouldn't it be great to have it? It's an absolute necessity. A couple of real quick last questions, and I know I've kept you longer than we've got time for, but what made you take this approach? We're evolving from a time when disruption was sort of an aberration. Now it's an economy based on disruption. When you're dealing with the kind of infrastructure and build-out that you're talking about, I got to assume that constant change and constant evolution of new technologies and new capabilities have got to be something that is kind of looking over your shoulder. But what makes you take this approach as opposed to, say, typical business models for telecom companies?
Well, so I've been at this for a while now, and this is sort of my second life in this industry from a neutral real estate landlord, let's call it, operator perspective. Telex was a really big success, and it proved out the model of interconnection, network-neutral interconnection, that it's real and that it works. So there's no more guessing around that. There's no more speculation. I know what is at the heart of success for all of the network operators, and that is neutrality within the real estate. If the physical structure where all the networks reside is not owned by a network operator itself, it is therefore neutral. And if the policies and procedures and pricing and terms and conditions within that environment are favorable to the network operators, then competition will thrive. And that means choice of access, and that means choice of providers and services, and best of breed, and essentially no matter who wins, I win. And that's been proven not just by the Telex model, but others like Equinix and other models like that around the world that I've studied. It's all the same. These are patterns. So I've taken the basics of physics and biology and chemistry and the sciences and applied it to this business within the real estate environment, and it creates a platform through which all endpoints can communicate openly and freely and most cost effectively. This concept of network neutral interconnection, whether it be through a carrier hotel or a data center like the Telex and Equinix model, was never in the United States applied to long-haul dark fiber. And that's usually problematic. And I've known this for years. And obviously, you can go around to any network operator that doesn't have their own fiber that needs it to have control, because this is all about control. And they will tell you that they want it and know how to use it, and they're not afraid to operate it, but they cannot get it. And that is a huge inhibitor to the GDP growth of the United States, which is a big macroeconomic problem for the world, not just for the U.S. So I put this system together, this concept of a model together 8-9 years ago, started the company in 2008, and have been set on this mission to create this platform, this superstructure, since then. And, the headwinds of the global economy collapsing in around 2008 sovereign debt crisis, foreign currency, central bank crisis. These have all been real issues that we've had to deal with, but we have persevered, and we have succeeded to put a prototype in place, which is a pretty hefty prototype, a Miami to Atlanta system. We've announced a lot of big customers, and it's working. So now it's just to take that and expand that out around the rest of the country and let all the regions connect into us so that they, too, can also benefit from unlocking their economic development potential and gains in productivity and all the things that you mentioned, healthcare, IoT, all of those things will come from a neutral infrastructure provider for the United States.
Well, I think, Hunter, obviously, in describing you, using a term like entrepreneur, I think you're the standard and define it. Obviously, it takes vision, but it also takes courage, and it's the kind of thing that you're building that history gets built on. It isn't just a small idea; it's a big idea that is making a difference, but will make a major difference in the evolution of remaining competitive, whether it's the city of Atlanta, the state of Georgia, the Southeast, or for that matter, the country. Hats off on a great idea, great vision, and I already know you're achieving some pretty strong accomplishments. The buzz is out about the company. But really, thank you so much for taking so much of your time to join us for a few minutes on Tech Talk to bear with our ignorance and give us some enlightenment.
No problem, Frank. Anytime. Thanks for having me.